Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Church Leadership Lab, where our goal is to have conversations that help empower healthy churches. I am half of your hosting. I'm half of your host, Scott, and the other half of your host is Casey. Hey, Casey.
Hi. Host or
Together,
hosting or hosts? Hostesses?
Yeah, hostesses. I feel like it's sort of like, anyone remember Captain Planet?
Yes.
Alan, you remember Captain Planet? Do you ever?
No clue.
Captain Planet was like all the elements came together, and it was like a superhero show.
Kind of like Voltron.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And with Captain Planet, they all when they all came together, they put their elements together, and it was like when all powers combine. So that's what I feel like when our hosting powers combine, then you have one solid podcast.
One host. I like it. Are you earth, wind, or fire or whatever?
Yeah, I'll be, I don't know what I'll be, whatever's available.
Whatever you want. You're so kind.
I think you just landed on your theme music for this podcast. I think that's what it is.
That might be licensed. We'll have to look into it. I don't think that's out of the budget.
I think it's worth the cost. Let's look into how much that's going to cost.
It might be public domain.
Yeah. Folks, if you heard that music as this podcast began, you know we were successful. If you didn't, you know we didn't really pursue it. So
fantastic.
Yeah. Well, we're excited for today's episode. As you've already heard, Alan George is our guest, and many of you have probably heard from or learned from Alan. He's on staff at Life.Church for almost 10 years, serving primarily as a church online pastor, where he really worked to leverage technology to make the truth of Jesus accessible to all people groups. And so he has an extensive background in leadership development, team dynamics, strategic thinking, and has traveled worldwide preaching at churches, teaching, speaking at conferences, all of that. And currently partners with churches and leaders to help them identify how they can leverage technology to further the gospel, to reach people like never before. So, Alan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It took everything in me to not do that's me, Casey. Sorry.
I did that.
We're just talking about how awkward bios are. So there's no context for that comment. But
I know. Well, I hope it was among the least painful you've experienced.
Yes. Great.
Well, Alan, let's start with this. One thing that we like to ask everyone who comes on the show, there's the public bio, which we quickly got through. But there is also there's stuff about you that doesn't really make the bio, but all your friends and family would know, this is true about you or whatever. So what is that for you?
There's a reason why those things don't make the public bio, Scott. It's on purpose.
And then you get this precocious podcast host who asks you about it. And it's like, come on.
Right out of the gate, too. Question number 1. Tell us your deepest, darkest secret.
Yeah.
So I used to be, so long time ago, the dream was for my wife and I, when we talked about getting into ministry, it was that I would preach, she'd sing, and I'd play the guitar. So I actually used to be part of a worship team, played bass for many years, and I actually used to sing, which is hard to believe because I can't hold a note for my life right now. And my kids hear me singing in the car and they're like, Daddy, that just, stop. And I'm like, guys, there was a time when I could sing, it's just way before you were alive, but it did happen. So for what it's worth, it doesn't seem like I could, but I did once upon a time.
Yeah.
Is there evidence of that out in the internet somewhere that our research team could go hunting for?
So my kids recently said, Dad, I just realized you were born in the 1900s. That just happened. So no, not a whole lot of I do have photos of playing bass, and then there's one, I think my wife was singing at a wedding, so I was playing guitar with her. So there's some kind of evidence floating around. Not sure.
Well, when I said our research team, we don't have one, so I think you're safe.
Yeah,
that's just me, Scott.
The same team that's going to go look for that cover song.
Yeah,
for the intro. Yeah, same.
I was going to say, that's
safe.
the same team. We're putting a lot of work on a team that does not exist. But I love that your kids
getting done.
I love that your kids said you were born in the 1900s because you're like,
yeah, man.
You're like, yes, that is true. I was born in the 1900s too. You're like, that is true, but the way you say that is not,
Yep.
it's not cool.
Yeah, not cool at all. So
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
that's awesome.
that's rude.
Well, we're gonna talk about a lot of things as we talk today, both online ministry, technology. What does it look like for churches to show up digitally, but also some of what you've been working on with healthy leadership and all of that. So I'm really looking forward to diving into it. One thing that I know happened that we've seen, I'm sure you've seen, is that churches had to get a digital presence out of necessity. So 2020 hit, all of that. And so it was like, wow, this has to happen, right? So
Mhm.
our hands
Mm,
kind of forced. So we have to do it. Um, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. But what I think can happen is you create something out of necessity, and then there's all these other priorities. And it's like that thing just kind of goes rather than having intentionality behind it. So, um, for churches out there who did that with their digital presence, right? They
Mhm.
created out of necessity. How can they go from maybe that thing that exists to a digital ministry with
Mhm.
intentionality? What's some thought process that they can have to kind of make that transition?
Yeah, prior to COVID, a lot of the churches, ours included, that were involved with church online and doing online ministry, essentially we followed the model of there's a concept that's working in our buildings, which is mainly weekend centered and weekend focused. Let's put that online and let's just see what happens. And that was a
mm,
lot of what happened prior to COVID. I think once COVID happened, and as churches, we were forced to close our buildings down, it was very interesting. A lot of the pastors that were over physical locations. So in our case, we're a multi site church. We broadcast from one location and it's sent out to multiple locations. And like many other churches in the US, when these physical locations were shut down, you'd see a lot of these campus pastors or these pastors at these locations struggle to find a way to connect with their people. Because in the past, they would come to us at a specific time during the week, and that was our opportunity to connect. Now, when that went away, it was interesting to see how all of these pastors and leaders really jumped online. And if you logged on to Instagram or Facebook, you could see there's like a million of these going live right now. Like everyone was live. It was all these backyard Bible studies and conversations. And what's interesting is people actually felt more connected to their pastors and their churches during that season than ever before. And it
Hmm.
was simply because they were there, they were present. What happened when the church buildings opened back up was that they didn't feel like they needed to do these online things anymore because it was like, oh, the building's open, I'm done.
Yeah.
And we're back to that weekend centric or weekend centered model. My thought process around this is if we can step away from being tied to the model that we're used to for so long and focus on how do we help our people become more like Jesus,
Hmm.
the answer is not as long as we connect with them once a week, they'll be fine. No, it's a daily walk. And so now technology is not about just taking a service and putting it online. It's a church saying, how do I connect with my people on a daily basis so that we can together grow and become more like Jesus? So I think it's more about how to help people become create or be formed in the image of Christ, and how do we as a church step into that opportunity? Because I believe that our communities want it.
Yeah.
Our people want the help. They want to become more like Christ, but they don't know how. They
Yeah.
hear a great sermon on the weekend, but then by the time they leave the parking lot or Monday morning, all's forgotten and they're kind of in the throe of work and family and kids and everything else that's pulling them 10 million different ways. And so, how can we as a church be present in those moments on a daily basis? So, that's kind of where my mind goes.
Yeah. And do you find that like when you start to look at like being present on a daily basis, walking with people, not just imposing the model of Sunday services, move it online, there we go.
Hmm.
Like practically, what have you seen that works well? I know every church is different. Not every church is going to do the exact same thing. But as a church leader might hear that and think, that's interesting. But does that mean I stream a mini service every day? Is that here's the playlist I'm listening to? Like, what are some of those maybe practical things that could even just be kind of brainstorm or ideas starters for church
Yeah.
leaders?
So there are two examples that come to mind. One is if you look at the YouVersion Bible app. Years ago, the team with the Bible app, they created these streaks and the verse of the day. Basically, they were creating reasons for why people would be drawn to logging in on a daily basis. And if we can get them to create that daily habit, chances are that it'll sustain and it'll stay longer. And so if you look at the Bible app now, they've got more things happening on a daily basis. My kids, they don't want to lose the streak that they're on because they want to maintain it and keep it. Now, is it because they love the Word of God? I hope so. But there's part of it is also the streak, and it just helps them stay connected. That's a great example. There's another church that we're good friends with, Crossroads out of Cincinnati. If you look at most church apps, so not the YouVersion Bible app, but if you look at most church apps, it's typically a library. It's here's where you can watch a message. Here's where you can fill out a form. You could probably find a group, but there's no reason that me as an attendee needs to log in daily. It's only if I want to listen to a message or if I'm searching for something, then I'll go to it. So we're not leveraging that app as a daily guide or an opportunity for us to connect with them. Crossroads is doing something interesting. They created this reason for similar to the YouVersion Bible app, but where you spend time just in silence, you spend time reading a verse and spending time meditating. They even have this cool little feature where it starts off with inviting you to just pause and breathe. And there's this graphic that kind of goes in and out, and you kind of match your breathing accordingly. And at first I was like, nah, let me try it. And I tried it because they, were trying this new approach. And I thought, like 10 seconds of just breathing and calming down just allowed me to be in a better place to be ready for the verse I was about to read. So going back to, those are just two examples. I think as a body of Christ, there's no limit for the creativity that exists.
Yeah.
We just need to quit thinking that everyone else has the better ideas and we need to look at everyone else. I would say look inside and be who God created you to be. And I really believe that the creativity that the team can come up with will be able to find solutions for how your people can connect daily.
Yeah.
I love that. And you have done a great job of building some tools to actually help people kind of go through that process. And I'm a sucker for a quiz, like a personality quiz. Well, speaking of it, as a child from the 1900s, right, there were quizzes in like every teen magazine, so I think maybe my old school or like olden days generation, we love a good quiz, but you've built some assessments that help churches and organizations with self-awareness to figure out what should you stop doing, maybe what should you start doing. I'm kind of wondering if you can talk specifically about the digital presence of a church and what are some things that a church can use with those assessment tools to kind of figure out, do they know who they are? Where are they going? Like how do those tools that you've built specifically apply to the digital presence?
Yeah, most churches that I speak to these days, they're in a place where either they don't know what to do and like it was out of necessity that they started.
Right.
And obviously when COVID was happening, engagement went through the roof because everyone's online.
Yeah.
And now as people are returning back to the buildings, the way they calculate engagement shows them that, man, I'm probably not as effective as I am. I don't know how true that is though, because I think gone are the days where we look at, nickels and noses, and that's how we evaluate the success of our church. I think there are more ways that we can do that. The assessment that I created with the help of a team, it's basically 6 categories that we look at. And we ask you questions based on those 6 categories so that you can view your online ministry through that lens, like leadership, data, volunteers, things like that. And because we can only, in order for us to grow and develop, we've got to start with assessing where we are.
Yeah.
If we're not true and honest about where we are, we're not going to be able to take the steps that we need to take. Okay. And I'll say this too, when it comes to digital ministry, I think there's this misconception that senior pastors or leaders might have that, church online is just one thing that I do. I've got my campuses, I've got church online, I've got our small groups, I've got missions. I think post COVID, we're past that. I think it's realizing that technology can be a relevant part of every area of our ministry. So if I was a pastor at a physical location, I'm not delegating my online responsibility to a church online pastor. I'm looking at it and saying, how can I leverage technology? Even though my people are showing up in person, what am I doing to connect with them on a regular basis so that we can strengthen our relationship and community can be strong? Again, not replacing the weekend gathering, but saying what more can we do and how can we strengthen what we have? So yeah,
I
that assessment is available for free. I'm sure we can add
I'm
links and
sure
stuff
we'll
like that.
drop to it. Yeah. I love what you just said. And I almost want you to say it again, that I just had this conversation a couple weeks ago about digital tools, and could some pastors perceive those, and I'm sure that some could, as almost competitive, to like, I
Mhm.
almost don't want to lead people to these online tools because then they won't come to service. And I'm sure that's true in some congregations. I don't think there's a one size fits all for anything, but I
Sure.
think if you're seeing this correctly, it's an extension of your
Mhm.
ministry to not only reach your current congregation where they are. I'm often not at home on the weekends.
Mhm.
Like, the world looks so much different. We travel with my daughter's gymnastics. I would love to be
Mhm.
able to log in and watch my pastor preach my sermon. I'm just using my phone as to do it. So it's an
Sure.
extension of my ministry, not an alternative to it. And I feel like that's kind of what you're saying.
Yes. And for example, not all pastors do this, but there's a tendency, if a family is traveling because of gymnastics or whatever reason, instead of the family coming back next weekend and kind of like hiding, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry, I
right.
missed.
Right.
It's imagine if the pastor were to say, "Hey, I'm so glad that you were still able to join us because this
Yeah,
is still you're still part of this family and you can still
exactly.
stay connected." I also want personally one of the experiences I've had is anytime we've traveled to go meet our communities that lived anywhere and everywhere, one of the first questions that I'd get when we would go as Life Church, it would be, "Hey, Pastor Allen, because like since you're here, does this mean like Life Church is coming here?"
Yeah.
And to me, what that said is that online experience didn't drive people away from the building. It
Mhm.
actually created this desire of them wanting more. Now,
Yeah.
you're going to have people that are going to hit the snooze button or the cruise control
Sure.
button and just kind of sit back and let life do its thing. But we have that in our physical buildings too. Just because they're sitting
Yeah.
in that seat doesn't mean they're engaged. So we've got to reevaluate how we define engagement. And like you said, not view these technology tools as a threat, but it's rather an additional way for us to connect and build that community that we really long for.
Well, this is such a different topic, but engagement and how we judge that has to change too. And I think it's really difficult to know engagement because we never know the intention of someone's heart. And we can
Mhm.
only take these data points that give us some insights. We
Mhm.
can't ever know, but it can kind of inform our decisions. And I won't say who it is, but you know who said this to me recently. We were comparing notes about how do we judge not entertainment engagement, and
Yep.
she said, on the contrary, if someone is absent for 6 weeks, what if it's not because they're less engaged? What if it's because they've been in the hospital, but they've never been closer to Jesus?
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, that's good. So like,
Yeah.
how we judge engagement, it cannot just be like some random number, certainly not attendance.
No, and I think at times, and I'll be honest, I struggled with this because I started at one of our physical locations before I
Mm,
moved into the church online role. When I was in the building, having somebody walk through our lobby, being able to shake someone's hand, like that felt like I knew my people.
Mm.
I
yeah.
had more information about my people online, but it didn't
Mhm.
feel like I knew them because I couldn't see them.
Mm.
And so many times we think we know our people, but we actually don't.
Yeah.
Again, not saying digital is better than in person, but it's just realizing they're not competing. And if
Yeah.
we can embrace the opportunity we have, then it's combining the physical and the digital and saying, God, how can we steward this community you've put in front of us in a better way with more information and being better prepared?
Yeah, and I think that just like you would look at like an assimilation process for somebody who might show up, there's almost like a digital assimilation. Like what's the experience from the first time somebody Googles us, right? Have we even thought through how do we show up on Google or on, well, essentially just Google. I don't know what else you're using to search. I'm not using Bing. No offense to Bing, all the power. I'm sure they're doing just fine, but you're probably Googling it. Okay.
One listener is like, I love Yahoo. How dare you?
Yeah. I love
Or
Bing.
searching on social media.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's just like, there's a new way then to think about that. Even what is that experience from letting people know what to expect and what you're about? How do you communicate that in a way that's really accurate to who God's called you to be? And then I think there's really interesting stuff too that we're starting to build out tools for, which is, so then how do you even sort of make that handoff between online presence to then showing up in the building? But there's almost an ability to know like, oh, actually you already, like your kids already checked in. Like we've, not like Disney, you're standing out there like, welcome home. We've been expecting you, but in a sense, like, no, this is one experience and you've started at what is now our front door, which is digital. And now you're here and it's sort of from the beginning lets people know that this is one church, and how we're expressing it. So,
yeah, I think our people are more ready for that assimilation than those of us who are on staff at a church.
Yeah.
And it's like we forget the world we live in once we step, when we put on our staff hat, because if you look at it, every area of our life, we are very comfortable with that digital experience.
Yeah.
But when it comes to church, we think differently. So because I work with churches, I do this for fun. You guys should try it too. So have you seen how most churches today have, hey, we're glad you're here. Very heartfelt, very welcoming kind of presentation from stage. And then they'll invite you to text a number and say, hey, let us know you're here. Text this number. Oh my gosh, it's heartbreaking. You hear such a warm welcome from stage, and then you text that number, and what you get is like, thanks for texting this number. Fill this form. Like it's the most cold, like just disconnected experience. And what is shocking to me is it's typically the churches and organizations that are really good with in-person experiences that just forget about the digital side. And they think it's complicated. It's like, oh, this digital stuff, like, I don't understand it. No, you do, because you understand people. And it's all about how do you help people feel when they walk through your doors. Same mindset applies when they log in online or text a number. And so even just redoing that initial text of, hey, we're like so glad you're here. How just match the warmth, essentially be who you are in person, be that same person online.
Yeah. That's a good call. That's a really practical thing, because I think a lot of people have that, whether it's a text or email or like whatever your automations look like. Have you looked at those with an empathetic mindset around how's this person going to feel when they receive this? Not do we get the link right? It's like, get the link right, but also know that you're doing something in this communication and this engagement for sure.
Well, it's like we kind of took the human element out of it. Just like going back in time, what would you do if you were doing this in person? If before there was texting, before there were online forums, how would you do this in person? Do that. Just do it automated, but don't remove the human interaction from it. Because you're right, the stage communication is so good. And then it just kind of wah wah. And you're like, put the human back in just a tiny bit. It's not that hard.
Yeah. I have a question on something that all these questions, like I don't have answers for. It's not like I'm asking something that's like, well, here
I don't either.
Yeah. But this is something I've been wrestling with and thinking about. And so I just kind of want to throw it out. And I know we're gonna kind of talk about some of the work that you've been doing in diving into healthy leadership and looking at, is our model of leadership equal or compatible or fall in line with the way of Jesus and just all of that. But one thing I've been thinking about is this tension between digital and between sort of the experience that we have with social media, with our phones. And there's some good things, and there's also some bad things about that in how it's shaping and forming us. And I've been trying to think through what's the tension of ministering well in the cultural context that we find ourselves in, right? Just like if we were missionaries to another country, we would seek to be really good, missional, culturally adept missionaries. So there's that end with a digital experience, with everything that we're talking about. But then there's also the tension of, and how do you not encourage your people to be shaped and formed the way that some of these platforms are built to shape and form them, and to grab their attention. And so I'm curious if you've thought through that or wrestled through that at all. And again, if you haven't, you can just say like, hey, no comment on that one. We can go from there. But
well, I think you actually answered part of your question when you said the whole, just like a missionary would go to a new mission field. I think there is a way to reach the people that you're trying to reach without giving into everything that that culture has that doesn't align with the Word of God. You know, so I think that's there. I also think being present in those finding ways to be present. So one of, again, from a practical thing that I did that helped me was I use social media, but I have to be very intentional because it can feel burdensome and it can feel more like work, because I never used social media for like fun. It was always, oh, I'm a church online pastor and I need to, in fact, it was my boss that came and said, dude, you're the church online pastor here at Life.Church and you're not on social media. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing, right? I should probably do that. That's a good idea. That's kind of how I got into it. And I realized that as much as, we have the Bible app and we have all these resources, I realized that the people we were trying to reach, they're not logging into their Bible app first thing in the morning, or they're not reading their Bible. But I knew they were on social media because some of them had started following me. And so I thought, let me just take the verse of the day on the YouVersion Bible app and I'd share my thoughts. And every morning I would just post something about the verse that I read, what it spoke to me. And Scott, I had so many people just say those were life-giving. And sometimes it's good to hear, but I'm like, man, why are you on Instagram for? Like, you need to be in your Bible. But at the same time, it's like, how do we leverage whatever we can to reach people? Now, the other side of it is, if you're not careful, like anything, you could get sucked into it and get caught up in the metrics and the just doing things for the sake of doing things and trying to be an influencer or whatever it is. Yeah. And I've had my struggles with that, and I've had to take time off of social media. So I think, like anything in life, it's just figuring out, God, what do you want me to do with this? How do I leverage it? And I think churches and we as Christians, we have an incredible opportunity in front of us. Oh, I'll say this. A friend of mine who if I tell you his name, you wouldn't know him, but he's got millions of followers on social media, but it's not under his name. It's like a generic kind of an account that he's created. And I remember talking to him and saying, hey man, I'm struggling with just being consistent and posting Bible verses. And it's just like, it's just too much. And he had a picture of, I'm sure you guys have seen it. It's Billy Graham speaking to an audience of people. It's the back of Billy Graham. And so you can see the crowd. And he said, Alan, imagine if this crowd is showing up and they're waiting to hear a word from God, and they are longing for hope. They're in a not so good place, and they're just really praying that God would somehow, somewhere, in some way speak to them. Imagine if Billy Graham, few minutes before showing up on stage, decided, you know what, I just don't feel like it. And he just goes back home. I was like, well, that's unheard. Like, I'm sure he's carrying the burden and that weight in an appropriate way that he needs to carry. He said, that's what I think. That's when I think about social media. That's how I think of it. And it just reframed my perspective, where it was not about the number of likes. It was not about who I can reach. It's not about showing up on the Explore page. It's saying, God, there might be somebody that's at the end of their rope waiting for a word of hope or some kind of sign from you. Could this verse or this encouragement or what I'm about to post, could that be the voice that they were waiting to hear, and
Yeah.
allowing that to motivate us. That's not easy because you see the numbers and you can be swayed by that.
Yeah.
But that really helped reframe me in that season when I needed that.
That's
I don't know if I
awfully
answered that
humbling.
question, but
No, you did. Yeah. And I think that is like the more I've thought about it, the more it's like, well, there isn't an answer. There isn't a solid, this is a blanket statement for everybody, or there isn't. There's a tension that you have to walk in wisdom and discernment, and understand that, like, just like anything that we do, because a church with today with no website, no digital anything, there can be some things that they're doing as well that are maybe not as helpful as they think. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's not so much the digital aspect, probably, as that we just tend to do that sometimes.
there's also that verse, and this might be a stretch, but I sometimes think of it this way. I forget where it is, but it says, and they overcame by the blood of Christ and the word of their testimony.
Mm.
Some people use social media as a way of just celebrating what God's doing in their life and just testifying and saying, hey, here's where I was, and here's how God saved me. He can do that in your life. I think the opportunity to reach more people than ever before is incredible.
Yeah.
And so how can we not leverage it appropriately?
Yeah. Well, I love both how we're hitting things big picture as far as looking at a 30,000 foot view, but also been some really practical things that I think are going to be really helpful for the church leaders listening.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.